Well, it's very hard for me to say how the public will react to anything. I think there are 2 or 3 things which are universal in life. I think actually all great literature has only 2 or 3 big themes. There's death, there's love, and there's war. And war is also a kind of death, so I think, or perhaps the lack of love, if I can define war as that. So it all comes down to love finally, right?
That's a very positive note. Would any of the other authors like to add on to this? Is love story serious? Let me just go back to what Annie said. She touched on 3 themes, that is war, death, and love. Now, war and death are generally have negative connotations, and love, I think, in spite of all its negativity, has some romanticism and positivity with it. So let me start with the love story theme and pose the question to one of our serious writers, Paul. Can I designate you as a serious writer? Really? Okay. Now, what do we do about it?
No, but you can ask me.
Pardon?
Problem is, people here can't hear what you say.
Another mic? Can we have another mic, please? That's okay. We have to make some arrangements about the mic. Yeah, that's better.
Check 1, 2, 3.
Yeah,
Here's the mic.
And then we will. Yeah. So I think I'll sit down there, and then that will be better because they're having a echo. Please. Hello.
Check 1, 2, 3.
I'll sit there. Then I think you can hear me better. Sorry about this. So my question was, Annie touched on 3 themes, that is war, death, and love. And I personally feel that war and death have negative connotations. And love, in spite of its negative connotations, is perhaps the most beautiful and romantic of feelings, positive-wise. So my question to one of our serious writers, Paul, is, do you think love stories are serious?
Well, that's very hard to say. Because, it all depends upon the intention of the writer and the kind of approach he wants to bring to a love story. So you can write a humorous love story, you can write a very serious love story, you can write a very, very tragic love story. So I think that sort of a black and white separation of a love story as serious or not serious, it may not be possible at all. The question is, why love story at all? I mean, love is certainly very important. I can see that in today's world we need love, that's all true. But many people may not want to write a love story at all because that may not be in that particular writer's line. So I really have nothing special to say about a love story because I don't see a love story as a category in story or literature or anything. Love could be, it is just one of the themes that a writer will handle when it suits him. That's the only way I can look at it.
Okay, in your famous love story, can I put more questions to you, Paul? In your famous love story about, which I think was quite famous, got itself listed in the American Congress of Library, you have given a picture of a love story which is kind of mixed with feelings of...
No, Gopal, I have written no stories actually.
Okay. I looked at it as a love story.
Yes, okay. It is. And I haven't written any love stories in that manner of speaking.
Okay.
No, not.
So what would you tell us something about the story? What did you want to depict in that story?
No, you see, I really don't think anybody would have read that story here for that matter because it's been translated into English and it's been a bit of a very popular story in Malayalam. It has given me a lot of attention. That story got a lot of attention, but it's not really a love story as Gopa thought it is. It's a story of Kerala is known for the people who migrate from Kerala to other places. It's all over India and abroad. So this story, especially we have lots of nurses going abroad. There are millions of nurses at work all over the world, in the Gulf, in the US, in Germany, all over the place, especially in the US and Canada. So this story is about a migrant nurse who is in New York, who lives in New York, and she goes back home, gets married, and brings a husband, like all of them do, brings a husband back, and he is a misfit in the very sophisticated American society. And certain other, he becomes, there's a lot of infidelity and things like that. So, frankly, it's very difficult to retell a story, because the story is a story, and for me to try to compress it into a few words, that would be very foolish. So that's not.
But did you try to give any message through the story?
No, the story itself is a message, as far as I can see. I can't use or inject a message into a story, but it just doesn't work. I don't think it works at all. Whatever, at the end of the day, when you come to the end of the reading, if whatever the story communicates, whatever the feeling or pleasure or joy or anger or whatever, that is a message.
Okay. I will come to this theme again, whether a writer writes for himself or herself, or whether she or he tries to convey a message or she just writes for herself. We'll come to this theme, but before we do that, let me ask a question to Yashodhara about her very famous and one of my favorite stories on Kunti. And she doesn't want to call it a story on Kunti. She prefers it. Can I have her own words on that story and her feelings? And before that, this may be very familiar to the audience of Odisha. Let me read out, if I could get those lines, beautiful lines which are written in Odia. Raja ଝିଅ ହୋଇ ସେ କେମିତି ବର ମାଗୁଥିଲେ ଏମିତି ସେ ବୁଢା ଦୁର୍ବାସା ବା ଦେଉଥିଲା କେମିତି କଣ ନା ତୁ ଯାହାକୁ ଡାକିବୁ ସେ ତୋ ପାଖକୁ ଆସିବ ଡାକିବୁ ମାନେ କଣ ଦୁର୍ବାସା କହିଲେ ଇଚ୍ଛିବୁ the famous line, whatever you desire you will get. As a woman, if you desire someone, he will come to you. That was Durvasa's blessing to Kunti. And I think Yashodhara has put it in a very nice way, and which is relevant in the contemporary world as well. How easily could Kunti sail off her illegal child on the water? It's something impossible in the modern world to do. But anyway, let's have our thoughts, Yashodhara's thoughts on them.
Thank you, Gopa. I'm trying to rake my brain. If I was writing anything about Kunti at all when I wrote the story. The name of the story is boon. The boon was granted to Kunti, but that is just an allusion. It comes just once in the story. And while writing it, I don't know if I was thinking of Kunti, in fact. It is, when one writes, I write a story, it is trying to express whatever one has thought about, whatever one has seen around oneself, and whatever one has read. And while doing it, while we go on living, going through our day-to-day living, things that we experience, things that we see happening around us, keep rearranging themselves. At least that happens in my mind. Inside my mind, like a jigsaw puzzle, rearranging and relocating to try and see how it would happen, how it would seem had it not been like this, had it happened in a different way. So, while writing the story, so many things have come, and among other things which have perhaps appealed to people like Gopa, the boon that was granted to Kunti, that is questioned by a few naive village girls, perhaps illiterate young village girls, and after seeing a theatre, village drama, they are discussing among themselves, jocularly, cracking fun at the boon itself. because in Oriya, Sarala Mahabharata, the Oriya version of Mahabharata written by Sarala Das, it is clearly, the boon empowers Kunti to invite any man that she desires. And this Ichibu word is there. Desire. Ichha is a desire and Ichibu is a verb form. So certainly the children that were born to Kunti, there is a very open, a connotations of physical union. It's not just a simple boon, granting her with the son. So these village girls are discussing. So basically, they're questioning these norms of society. The first question that they discuss, that how could a girl, the line that you quoted in English, I would translate. So one girl is asking the another. They are all married girls, by the way, and they are young girls with children, married and children. So she's asking, how could a girl so well cultured and a king's daughter, and who was instructed by her father to serve the Rishi Durvasa. So a girl, young girl who serves a Rishi, hopes for a boon. And what was the boon? Durvasa says, whichever man that you desire would come drawn to you. So what is this contradiction inside even then perhaps, this norms, contradiction. So desiring a man and getting any man that a girl would like, would it be considered a virtuous thing? So gunavanta, that word I have used. And then the girls say that, oh, how would it be if such boons were there?
Yeah. It's a very nice summary rather, or point of view. But when I was reading the story, many thoughts crossed my mind. She has touched on issues like unwed mothers, how they could dispose of their children just like putting them on the water. How could a woman married that to desire one husband after other? And is there anything really true that whatever a girl desires, whoever she desires, she gets it? So these are some of the themes which we would like to take up in the interactive session. And I'm hoping that there will be some questions to Yashodhara on those themes. Now let me turn to Dipti. Now Dipti's one story which really touched my heart and very close to my heart as well was the story, a love story in America, right? And this is a story about a young person who goes to America, gets a good job, and he is very prosperous, and his mother is alone in India. Correct me, Dipti, if I'm wrong. And then he takes his mother along, hoping that she will have a nice life and she can be looked after there in America. Now, what happens in America is like, because this couple is busy with their own life in America, they have to resort to a family friend who takes care of the mother and takes her around. Now, in a casual conversation, the son comes to realize that this neighbor, who is American, has developed a liking for that woman, and he is even very open about the choice. He says that I would like to, the son says that you're very lonely, why don't you take up a wife? And then he says that, yes, of course, if your mother is willing to become my wife. And with that, the son gets a shock, and the story ends with the dialogue. The son is telling to his wife that it is time we send our mother back home. So the thing is that sons, when it comes to their modernity and their challenges that America gives us, we accept it wholeheartedly. The changes, the westernization, the patterns, the cultures. But when it comes to our traditions like having your mother getting married again, or your widowed mother, perhaps we are hesitant. And this contradiction, I feel, is very, I won't give my views before we listen to the author. Let me see how he sees these contradictory effects of Americanization on our society in India in general and Odisha in particular.
The story you are referring to is actually titled America Ek Premo Kahani. America, a love story. What I think is that in our culture, the so-called the effect of romantic love is very, very exaggerated. And that's why probably the first question Gopa came up with is because of this. And in many of my stories, I've tried to sort of critique or interrogate this idea of romantic love. And in that story, the son was not expecting his old mother to get married again, because there is a contradiction between what he is expecting in India and what the expectations are in America. And there is a culture class there. And the old man who is the neighbor, he sees his mother as just another woman. But when we think of a mother in India, it's absolutely different. And the last line in the story ends with the dialogue that a widow should die in the same place as a husband has died. So this is very ironical in the sense that for his whole life, he was trying to bring his mother back from village so that he doesn't have to go back to India again and again when his mother was getting sick. But the moment the male member, an older male member, falls in love with his mother, his world comes crashing down. There's lots of this possessiveness and feelings about mother. These things come into question. But
Dippy, can I interrupt here? I mean, you're talking about a widow getting cremated with her husband. I mean, but we have been having widow remarriages in India for a long time, even in modern times. So I don't think it's about widow remarriage. It's about his mother accepting the fact that he would give his mother to marriage to a non-Indian.
There is one line in that story, why the mother is actually getting very close to that man is because she confesses that my father looks like him. So if you have read it carefully, so,
yeah, I mean,
so that's the reason
that understood. That is the way of showing that this lady is getting attracted to the man because there is some similarity between the person she loved and this present person. But my question is like, is that really a culture clash there, or should we adopt such things as a part of culturalization, or is there a contradiction?
In most of my stories, I have tried to see how we construct the Occident, how we construct America, England, and the West. The very same way as the colonizers constructed the Orient. So there's a kind of a reverse process going on because many people are traveling to the West, finding jobs and all. And they go to that world with a lot of preconceived ideas about the West. And then when they come to terms with a very different kind of reality there, and they also come up with lots of crises. Not many narratives actually put into the discourse these crises they actually confront in that society.
Okay, understood. Now my direct question is, would a mother remarry? Would a widow mother remarry?
That's the contradiction.
No, I want a yes and no answer. That's it.
India. That's the patriarchy, the male mentality, the divided man.
I fully agree. I think
the freedom men would want for themselves, but would never allow their women to have the same kind of freedom.
Well, with that note, I will end it because that's a contradiction. If men can want it, why not women? We'll open this discussion to the floor after a while. Now, my question on that note to Paul. Paul, you have been writing you've been writing novels and short stories, and you have a regular column with. What do you write in your regular column?
In my columns, I write politics, social issues, political issues. Related to Kerala, basically, because it's in Malayalam, and the scenario that I am very familiar with is Kerala, the society.
Do you think you have any strong political views?
I have strong political views, yeah, I have. Because, I do have it, because I am a citizen and I think I need to be very political. in my outlook on India and my state, Kerala, because it's the politicians who are controlling our lives. So as long as political parties and politicians are controlling our lives, we need to have a very strong political outlook as a writer and as a citizen.
Do you think...
Because we are being manipulated by politicians.
Yeah, that's a very nice point. But do you think your political views somehow influence your short story writing?
No, that is a different kind of politics. That is when not the politics that is being played by the political parties. When I write, it is the politics of cultural values, social values, conservatism against modernity, traditionalism against progress, and gender problems. You see, Kerala is a highly patriarchal society. So, though we have actually, in the population, women have a majority, but women are very, very, very secondary citizens in Kerala. So there is a gender problem. So that is the politics that works at the back of my mind when I write a story. But necessarily, all these politics need not come into every story.
They need not, but do they?
Beg pardon?
I said they need not, but do they? Do they come into your story?
Yeah, they do come into the story because, well, if I am describing a man-woman relationship or just a conversation between a man and a woman or whatever, I have to make sure that the inbuilt male chauvinist, Malayali male chauvinist in me does not emerge, does not work, that I must edit myself. See, because these things, we are all brainwashed, basically. Right from childhood, religion brainwashes you, the social values brainwashes you. So finally, when you sit down to write, you have to remember that you are a brainwashed man. That over the last 30, 40 years, brainwashing has happened. And brainwashing happened when I was very young. So I don't even know that I am brainwashed by religion, by caste, by conservative elements, etc., etc. So that is where I bring in that element into that.
Do you think your view of women is also brainwashed?
Beg your pardon?
Do you think your view of women is also brainwashed?
Yes, it used to be. Because, it takes you a long time to realize that there are other ways of looking at women, other ways of looking at religion, of the business of God, etc., etc., the whole lot of things. So it used to be I used to be a brainwashed, typical Malayali, looking at women as something else. But then you grow, you learn, you change, you try to acquire better values. Yes.
So now you think you have a different view of women, and what is that? We would like to know.
Pardon?
Do you think that your brainwashing has, you accept that your brainwashing has undergone change?
Yeah,
right?
I think so. Yeah.
So at this point,
hopefully. Yeah.
So at this point, I would like to just give us a little glimpse of what kind of a woman should modern India have.
What kind of a woman
should modern India have?
Should modern India have?
Yes.
It's not a woman, it's anybody, any citizen. I think a woman or a man, well, I suppose education is very important, that you need to be secular, you need to be progressive, you should not be under the influence of political parties, you should not be under the influence of religious notions, you should not be under the influence of caste. You must
understand what he's done wrong. And in this whole process, his wife leaves him. And when she realizes that her parents will not support her, she comes back to him. And I think that when you're talking stories, you have to look at all shades of the spectrum. It doesn't help to say that, that I write from a woman's perspective or I write from a man's perspective. At least half the stories in this book are written from a man's perspective. And in a relationship, there are pushes and pulls and power structures that are constantly being negotiated. It's a constant process of negotiation.
Very nice. We do understand that there is constant negotiation of the writer with her thoughts, or is it the audience? That's what I want to know. Do you think about the audience when you're writing, or do you deal with your own thoughts?
Maybe I'll just read one page. I'll want to read one page, and I think after that you can answer the question.
Okay,
for
Annie
me.
has been very insistent on reading a page from her book. I think it will be unfair if I don't, but I hope it's not more than one
It will
page.
not be more than one page, and I seriously think
How
that
many minutes will that be, though?
you can
Depend on
time
the
me
speed.
if you want.
Okay.
It'll be shorter than your questions.
Okay, thank you, Annie.
So I am going to read this one page from the time when the story that I'm talking about is when the wife comes back. The wife comes back. And when the wife comes back, the husband is trying to understand what to do. He doesn't know what to do. And so they have a fight. And I'm going to read out I'm going
you
to
maybe
read
you can
out the fight scene to you, mainly because this theme is harmony and perhaps we should disrupt the harmony a little bit. He turned a page. Finally, the wife took his name. He lowered the newspaper. "What is wrong?" the wife asked. He shrugged. "You have to talk to me," she said. "Since last night, suddenly you've been behaving like, I don't know, like I don't exist. I thought things were going to be better in our home." His mouth stretched into a mirthless smile. He hadn't planned on saying it, but the words tumbled out of his mouth. Home. I thought this home was a dead relic. Dead things don't get better. They rot. The wife clenched her fists. A quaver crept into her voice. "I don't understand you." "Forget about me. What about you? What about me? What do you want?" "Respect, to start with. When have I ever treated you with disrespect? You never respected me. You just respected your friends and the colleagues, not me. That is not fair. It is not fair to accuse me of that. It wasn't fair on me to be reduced to something lying around the house, a woman who nurses the baby and supervises the servants. Oh, please, yes, I was just somebody you hired to run the house so you could be left free to create, to become this famous rich person. You tell me, was that all you were? I felt like it. I can't control how you feel. I didn't know how you feel. How come you notice small details about the world, about cities and railway stations and music and landscape, but you don't know how your own wife feels, for God's sake? I didn't marry cities and landscape. So marriage means a license to stop caring. Are you seriously suggesting that I didn't care for you? Well, I didn't feel cared for. Then why did you stick around all this time? Oh, of course, now that is my fault too. Yes, it is, because you never said a word about what I was doing wrong. Did I not say I want to do my own thing? Well, yes, then why didn't you? Who stopped you? You never supported me. I did everything I could. You weren't there. Great. So now we are back to square one. Me not being there. Yes, yes, yes. Because you have all the time in the world for others, for work, and I had nobody. Bullshit. I didn't even go out anywhere except for work. You had girls crawling all over the studios. No, there was nobody anywhere else. You know that. Yeah, I believe that. Even when you didn't let me touch you, I didn't go to another woman. So I'm supposed to be grateful. I'm saying it because you brought it up. Do you expect me to have sex when I'm unhappy? No, I expect a little honesty and consideration. You're such a self-obsessed bastard, and you're what? A lazy, gold-digging bitch.
That was some outburst.
Nice and harmonious, wasn't it?
I don't think it was harmonious in any way. That's my view. I have the right to disagree, right? Anyway, with that, I think we have heard some fiery statements and some outbursts from our authors. And now I would like to open the floor to the audience. If they have any questions for any of our authors, they're most welcome. But I think my question, any questions from the audience? Is there anyone to pass on the mic?
I am Rabinaran Das from Balasore. My question is to Paul. Paul, some question on seriousness, popularity, etc. was put to you. I think that was the title question of the session. Don't you think that these short stories are already sized up? Why should we look at the binaries, whether it is popular, it is very serious? There are also other categories. But don't you think this kind of categorization do not have their own values in our estimation, in our assessment? Because stories are already sized up. That is what I mean to say.
When you say stories are sized up,
They are already sized up. The serious stories have got equal importance as the popular stories.
well, just now we discussed that even popular stories can have serious themes. Like Kunti's story is a very popular story, but it's a serious theme. So what exactly would you like Paul to answer?
What I meant to say is, when this story is already sized up, what is the question of the necessity of sizing up the stories?
Is there necessity? Because that's the theme, that's the title of the short story.
You mean, is there a need to categorize into popular and serious? I personally believe there's no need to categorize, because there are, it's the freedom of the reader to choose what he wants to read. And
perhaps that's the beauty also.
And it's the freedom of the writer to be, it is not that, for example, I don't know whether my stories are serious or popular. Frankly, I would like them to be popular, in the sense that I have more readers. So these are labels which we place, we put upon certain art forms, and we use it very loosely, I think. So I agree with you, there is absolutely no need for, but when you are trying to discuss a subject, you create these categories. I think that's all, that's nothing else to it.
Yeah, I think unless you, as writers, I think we don't distinguish between popular and serious, and as readers also, we don't distinguish between popular and serious. But when you start looking at the dynamics of why a story is popular or serious or otherwise, then you start labeling it. And labeling helps in understanding. I guess that's the only purpose. Otherwise, there's no such thing. And we can't label a story one way or the other anyway. Any more questions, please?
Friends, I am Subhash Chandra Patra from Balasore. I have a question anybody from the panel can answer. Do you think that short stories give an incomplete picture of life?
Anyone? Annie? Maybe Annie can answer because her stories deal with such themes. Do you think short stories deal with incomplete?
No, they don't. No, they don't. What else can I say? All literature deals with only one small part of life. So, to the extent that any genre would tell any story, short stories do that as successfully or less successfully. Even a novel doesn't encapsulate the whole universe.
I think I also totally agree with Annie. It just gives you a glimpse of life, and any glimpse of life can never be complete. So if you say that the so-called incompleteness may be just a part of life, which is always incomplete and it's ever going and evolutioning. So any more questions, please?
R. Mahapatra. Question is to Annie. The story that you read out, you said there is a certain harmony. My question to you is, the more we search for harmony, do we not enter into a disharmonious net?
Sir, I was being sarcastic.
Basically,
I'm sorry, I didn't make myself clear, perhaps. I was being sarcastic.
Okay.
That's the creative genius of a writer.
Yes, yes. I get it. Isn't it? Do you really believe that the more...
Sir, I'll tell you a little anecdote in response to this. I have just moved houses. I moved into a rented flat with my cousin, and young women, especially young women who are not with husbands and children, find it very difficult to find accommodation in Bombay. Nobody wants to give them flats. All kinds of questions are asked. And I become very resentful because, what is this about, that if you are a family person, then you are in some way better behaved. I was in the lift the other day. I was sharing the lift with this elderly gentleman, both retired, and his wife. They were coming down in the lift with me. Something was wrong between them, I could tell. The elderly gentleman was still buttoning up his shirt. The lady was barefoot. She'd stepped out of the house without her shoes. She was telling him something and he was not responding. As long as I was in the lift, they kept quiet. The moment I stepped out of the lift, the woman tried to say something to the man, and this old man turned around and he slapped the woman. And he abused her, verbally abused her. He said, "Sali halkat." And I'm walking down and I'm thinking, so this is the ideal that's held up for us. This is what you're supposed to look forward to. 50 years of being together and you're still slapping the woman. Or perhaps starting to slap her now in your old age because you can no longer take it. So this whole thing of, harmony in relationships, in the household, I don't believe there has ever been any harmony. We are not moving towards disharmony. We are coming from disharmony.
Has she answered your point? I mean, there's constant battle between, to rather achieve that harmony on the part of, both the men and women must be facing this harmony and disharmony thing. But I would like to add a little bit of thing from my own personal experience, that yes, a woman's identity, unfortunately, not in India, but all over the world, is somehow not being done on the basis of her qualifications or her talents. Rather, she's always tied up with something or the other. And from a very personal note, I don't carry with me the signs of marriage, so people don't dare to ask me about my husband. But often they will ask me, "Who's your father?" So, generally, it's like in a patriarchal society, your identity is always connected with something or the other. And perhaps this is the harmony we are seeking for and the modern woman is seeking for. And I hope this patriarchal society gives that identity only on the basis of us and not because of anybody else.
You said you are middle-aged and same time you say you are like 10 years old, fresh and young. How does that work?
Actually, let me be very frank today. I have a lot of stage fright. That's the reason why whatever I wanted to say, I wrote in my stories. It is very ironical that I've been called upon on the stage and I'm being asked to speak about my writing. That's number one. Why I said about this consciousness of the child is because the point of view of the child actually rhapsodizes the ordinary. What we see in literature is actually we try to talk about the ordinary things of life in a manner which will be appreciated, and we look at them and we wonder. The sense of wonder comes from this consciousness of the child, because for him, everything is such a wonderful thing. Everything is a sense of discovery. So, when I went back to the field when I was playing, when I was very young, the journey from my home to that field was like crossing the Amazon. It's such a long distance. Now when I become so old, and it just took me 20, 30 steps to cover that distance. And then when I thought back, then I saw that this is the long distance I used to cover And the fear of the father, the mother, the bullies, and the fear of elders, which were acting against me when I was going to play in the field, and the fear of the exams, all these things came back to me with a sense of wonder. So I think most of the writers, most of the human beings, adults, retain part of their childhood alive in themselves. And a writer has to do more of it, because in order to bring that back, he has to go back to the consciousness of the child. So therefore, in most of my stories, I always look to this aspect of life.
Did you get your answer, sir? Thank you. There's a lady in the back who wants to ask a question.
My question is for Annie. Annie, you said that often modern women feel themselves to be victims. So is it their own construction, or do you think that it is the social construction that makes them to feel as victims? As a writer, do you have any answer, or do you have any prescribed path for an easy ride to get over this feeling? I don't know whether I would be considered to be a modern writer, a modern woman, but as an ordinary woman, I'm asking this: how to do you have a prescribed path? As a writer, do you have anything to any advice, any rule for this, that how to get over this? Thank you.
Ma'am, I'd like to answer your question as a woman rather than as a writer. No right in the world is handed to us on a platter. No right. We are talking about very ordinary things right now, like, okay, will I feel fulfilled? Will I blossom to my full potential? These are the questions that the modern woman is talking about. But even 100 years back, there were women who were giving up their lives for the right to vote. Nothing has ever been given to anybody easily. And I think this is perhaps some deep flaw in the human soul, that we will suppress anybody who we can get away with suppressing. And I think the flaw with modern Indian women the big flaw is that they refuse to take the power that is given to them. They refuse to stand up and take that power. You're educated, you're sent out, you can work, but then you say, no, I want to sit at home with my husband and children. Then the husband will obviously dominate the household. You will not fight for other women's rights, because that is not your problem, right? None of the middle class women want to fight for any of the worker women's rights, because the domestic workers are making our lives easier, right? You don't want to unionize them. You don't want to stand up and work for, say, garment workers' rights. As long as women are not willing to fight for rights of every woman, nothing is going to change. And if you keep taking one step forward and two steps back, that, okay, now my life is okay, so I'm going to just, enjoy it. Let the husband work, I'm going shopping. If that is your life, I'm sorry, you've made yourself a victim. You have no one to blame but yourself.
Yeah, to conclude, it's a wonderful. To conclude, I would say that if you want your freedom, you have to be accountable to yourself. You can't just depend on someone and yet you feel that your voice will be taken into account. So if you have to be independent, if you have to be modern, and I do not know why people confuse with modern woman and otherwise. Every woman is modern in one way, and they have the right and the potential to be so. And why can't we women do it? Why must we depend on others to get our voices? And why must we just contented by depending on someone? Isn't it time that we change? With that note, I'm sorry we have to put an end to this session. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I thank you all my writers in the panel for their valuable comments, and I apologize really if I have anyway pushed them a little far, especially Paul and Dipti. I hope you have all enjoyed it. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. We would like our panelists and, of course, our moderator to stay back. We will have a small ceremony of presentation of mementos. I would request our moderator for the first session, Ms. Gopa Naik, to present mementos to our panelists. Mr. Paul Zakaria. Thank you so much, sir, for being part of the first session. Madam Jashodhara Mishra. Ms. Annie Zaidi. Last but not least, Mr. Dipti Ranjan Patnaik. And I would request Mr. Paul Zakaria to please present a memento to our moderator, Ms. Gopa Naik.
And here is a little note from our writers. If anyone from the audience would like to converse with Annie or anybody of us, you're most welcome to continue the discussion after the session or wherever you're free, lunchtime, or Annie will be here throughout the day. And so will all. Paul, you're open to conversation with our audience, right? So all of them are willing to take any questions you have. Annie, thank you.
Thank you so much. You've been so kind. Yes, our speakers, our panelists are open to discussion beyond the stage also. That'd be so nice of them. And we'll move on to our next session in a short while. Thank you so much.
It may be proper that it should be defended. This is what Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote in the preface of A Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin, a book she wrote to defend Uncle Tom's Cabin. And in this book, she proceeded along the course of the story from the first page onward and developed, as far as possible, the incidents by which different parts were suggested. This is without any question the greatness of a novel, and Indian novels are no exception. All novels are sequels. Influence is bliss. And now, here are our panelists.
Just for the record, let's get the story straight. Not the time of fishing.
The Indian novel now performs the role the great mythologies and Puranas performed in earlier times as a user's manual, as master texts of culture. The mythologies and Puranas embody both the Paramarthic and the Vyavaharic notions of truth. Ladies and gentlemen, now it is an honor for me to invite our guest panelist here on stage. I would like to begin by introducing you to our moderator, Professor Jatin Nayak. Professor Jatin Nayak has won Katha Translation Award 1997, Hutch Crossword Book Award 2004. He has co-translated into English the classic Odia novel Chamana Athaguntha. With that, I would request our guest panelists to kindly join us on the dais. Ms. Pratibha Ray, Kajal Oza Vaidya, Shishir Ramawat, and Ms. Gitanjali Shri. And ladies and gentlemen, can we have a round of applause as we move into our next session, the great Indian novel.
Welcome to the second session of the Think Literature Festival. Before I introduce our very distinguished authors, I'll just speak very briefly about the theme of the discussion, and then it will be a very informal conversation with our authors, with our panelists, and of course later we will invite you to ask a few questions. So, I remember a very interesting thing that once Professor T.K. Umen said in the course of a lecture. He said that India is not a nation in the sense that, well, Denmark is a nation or Britain is a nation. It's a national state. It's not a nation state. Because it has many languages, many cultures, many religions, and this diversity is the source of its strength and its greatness. But one increasingly gets the impression that this diversity is being seen as a liability. We somehow think that we shouldn't have this diversity, we should get rid of this diversity. It's a liability, not an asset. That we are, at least the articulate middle classes, seem eager to achieve unity at the expense of diversity. Not unity in diversity, but unity at the expense of diversity. Embrace a monolingual and monocultural future. Where does the Indian writer, if such a creature exists, position himself or herself? Do we interrogate the idea of India, celebrate its fragmentation, or assert that there is unity in the midst of bewildering diversity? That there is something called Indian literature that's written in many languages. That's the motto of the Sahitya Academy. Can we think of India as Europe, which boasts of a common culture in spite of its linguistic, cultural, and religious diversity, its violent past and troubled present, and maybe uncertain future? If it's possible to speak of the great European novel, or the great American novel, which remains a metaphor of identity, and every American author is haunted by the vision of writing, being able to write this great American novel. Or novels, if it or they have been written in Russian, Spanish, German, or English, can we speak of the great Indian novel, not in an ironic way, but in all sincerity? We have with us today 4 distinguished Indian writers of prose fiction from different parts of the country. And I would invite them to reflect upon this question and share with us their considered views. The festival has provided us with a unique opportunity to interact with major authors from other parts of India and discover the richness of the literary traditions of our neighbors. One wonders why the great works written in Indian languages have not been able to reach readers in different parts of India. When the epics in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata could permeate the cultural fabric of India, perhaps we need festivals like these to promote a dialogue among various Indian literatures and rediscover a common shared heritage before we look elsewhere for inspiration. Ladies and gentlemen, may I now take the opportunity to introduce our distinguished panelists. First, I will introduce to you Dr. Pratibha Ray, renowned novelist and short story writer, who has won several prestigious awards, including Sahitya Academy Award and the Murti Devi Award by the Gyanpith. Her works have been translated into English and several other languages, including Sanskrit. Whenever I try to introduce her to someone at the Jaipur Literature Festival, I was gently reminded that I was wasting my time, for she is widely known as the author of Jagyasini. Then we have Gitanjali Sri, sitting there, eminent Hindi writer. I unconsciously claimed her for Odisha when I mistakenly addressed her as Gitanjali Mishra. But I wasn't alone. On the plane, an Odia mistook her for an Odissi dancer. So she has an alternative career waiting for her in Odisha. And we have Kajal Oza Vaidya sitting next to Dr. Pratibha Ray, distinguished Gujarati novelist, who is a powerhouse of a writer. 46 or 45 novels? 52, my God. So her energy puts us all to shame. I hope in the course of today's discussion she'll share with us the secret of such energy. And we have this very young man, Sisir Ramavat, and a well-known novelist from Gujarat. He's a household name, as the brochure points out, and his novel Vikrant has been serialized. And I tried to access his blog. He's a vigorous blogger And I tried to access this blog, but unfortunately it's all in Gujarati, so I got defeated. But I'm sure he'll become a household name in Odisha very soon after this, I think, panel discussion. Thank you very much. I would now request our distinguished panelists to talk briefly about their work and their life as writers, their career as writers, in relation to the overarching theme of this discussion. So may we begin with Gitanjali. You can remain seated.
First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this festival for giving me this opportunity. I'm really, really happy to get this chance to meet some other writers from other parts of the country. But I'm also very happy to be in Orissa. It's my very first time here, and I'm really quite thrilled about that. So thank you. Coming to the session, I must admit that till very recently I assumed that I had to come and do a reading of my work, and it is only at absolutely the nth hour that I realized I had to talk about my work and about the theme. That doesn't make me very comfortable. I'll try. Some tentative thoughts I'll share with you. Jatin sent a little